Bleacher Report, as we all know, dropped their top 100 list last week. We react to it, made some content, more or less. I just didn't like how inconsistent the reasonings behind it was. Some of the metrics were really, really flawed. And so I got quite a few people just telling me, hey, instead of just complaining, why don't you make your own list? And I think that's actually a pretty great response, especially because I do a lot of complaining on the media. So I decided to take my time out and make my own top 20 list of all time. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I try my hardest to not be biased and not allow certain things outside of basketball dictate some of my opinion. However, even after doing some more research on the player that I have right above this gentleman, I have no problem with potentially removing him from the list. Of course, that is Mr. Karl Malone. All other shenanigans aside, excellent NBA career, played for in a really, really extensive period of time. And part of my criteria is not only how high did you peak or how high of an impact your prime was, but how long you were able to sustain it. 14-time All-Star, 14-time All-NBA, 2-time MVP recipient. By the end of his career, posted up nearly 37,000 points. Also has a lot of turnovers as well, but the one thing that kind of stops me from putting Malone in the top 20 at his best from 88 to 98, we go to the postseason. Unfortunately, that accuracy is a bit up and down. We've talked about this. Being able to translate your regular season impact to the playoffs is also very important to me as well. And that's probably the biggest reason why I just don't have Karl Malone in the top 20. I'm going to make the decision to cut him out because the player had ahead of him actually did translate a little bit better than Malone did. He got better as his career progressed, and that's actually why, even though his numbers are better from a sheer volume standpoint early on in his career, I would very well argue his game was way more defined heading into from like 95 on to 98. And I also believe it's not a coincidence that that's the reason why they saw their most postseason success. Just the inconsistencies in the postseason runs is the biggest reason why I just don't have him in my top 20. For number 20, I think this is probably one of the more underrated players in NBA history. That player is Elgin Baylor. Grossly underrated throughout the course of NBA history. 11-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA, 1 Rookie of the Year. And though he never won MVP, and I say this all the time when it comes to winning the MVP, just so y'all know, I'm not huge on necessarily if you won the MVP or not, because I know there's several players throughout NBA history who have not only not won the MVP, but have had better seasons than players who actually have won the MVP. As long as you have like MVP caliber impact, that's fine. But overall, Elgin Baylor really did innovate a lot of things that we see in today's game. In particular, being a point forward. When you watch him back in the day, Elgin Baylor's running up and down the break, leading the break as a forward, initiating offense, facilitating, really creating for his own. The other thing, quick fun fact, in 1962, the reason why Elgin Baylor only played 48 games is because at that time he was dealing with military responsibilities. He could only play with the team through weekend passes. So if their games were not on the weekend, I think it was Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, he could not play with them at all, and he did not practice with them at all, and still went out there and gave you 38 and 18. The separator between him and Karl Malone is how much he sustained a lot of his accuracy in the postseason. There is, in a lot of these series, obviously they're concluding against the Boston Celtics. There was a lot of times where they would either go up against the best defense or the second best defense and have to figure out a way to score against Bob Pettit and then figure out a way to score against Bill Russell. Ridiculous. And the fact that he was able to sustain that level of accuracy throughout most of the postseason, I do find that a little bit more impressive than Karl Malone. Moving on to number 19, Dr. J, Julius Erving. Julius Erving, another player who's grossly underrated throughout the course of NBA history. 16-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA performer, 5-time All-ABA. And yes, I am taking into consideration what he did in the ABA. 4-time MVP. I think 2 or 3 of those were in the ABA. Made an All-Defensive team in 76 in the ABA. And then won a championship in 1983. One of the very few players that translated from ABA to NBA. And even though it took him a while to kind of pick up the production, started to get back to some of the level of impact that we saw of him in the ABA in his years in Philadelphia, started to give you the 25 points per game with the 7 to 8 rebounds, 4 to 5 assists as well. Won league MVP, but finished second, first, and then third, and then fifth in the MVP race for a 4 straight year span. And then obviously won a championship heading into the postseason. Like I said before, a lot of that impact was still sustainable. In 1980, made it to the finals, beating the Boston Celtics in the process. Obviously a younger Larry Bird, went to 7 against Larry Bird again, and then beat Larry Bird, that team, one more time in 1982. So matched up against some really, really good competition. Obviously when he won, he wasn't the first option, and also he kind of regressed a little bit. There were some tendencies as a jump shot shooter that didn't carry over as much, and that was probably the biggest factor to why he wasn't as successful against the Celtics. That front court was a bit more formidable, but at the end of the day, really, really good player. I don't think I need to go into too much explanation. Coming in next at number 18, big dog Giannis. Now, I do not believe that I have to go into too much explanation on Giannis. My only gripe with him is that it's just too early in their careers for me to put them any higher. But Jokic and Giannis are on a stretch right now that is very impressive. And obviously, if they continue this degree of dominance, they will be higher just because they were able to sustain it. Part of the reason why Giannis is where he's at right now is simply because his peak is just too overwhelming to deny. It's way too overwhelming to deny. 9-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA, 5-time All-League Defense, 2-time MVP. Obviously, have had way more MVP caliber season. Giannis is in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's in year 7 of finishing 4th or higher in the MVP race. Year 7. Like I said, in a row too. In a row. Like I said, I don't really think I need to go into too much explanation. We're here now. That 2021 run, very underrated. Somehow, I think a lot of people overlook it just solely because he was not 100% healthy that entire run, understandably so. But I fail to ignore the fact that Giannis started the 2021 finals coming off of a hyperextended knee. Of course, coming off of a hyperextended knee. He wasn't going to play the greatest coming out the gate. So those first 2 games in the finals where they end up losing, Giannis, one game had 20 points. The next game, however, he jumped right up to 42. If you remove that first game in the finals, Giannis in the next 5 games in the finals is giving you 38, 12, and 5, dog. 38, 12, and 5 with 2 blocks, and finish off with the 50 ball with 14 rebounds. And then went to the free throw line and made 17 and 19 of his free throws. Giannis peak is up there, dog. Give it a couple more years, he will be jumping up. And the same can be said with the next player as well. And I know Jokic, 7-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA, 3-time MVP, won a championship just like Giannis as well, Finals MVP just like Giannis as well. And I think, as we all know, very similar to Jokic. Very similar to Giannis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the last 7 years has been 4th or higher in the MVP race. The two things that always will separate Jokic and Giannis from me is that Jokic's ability to carry over his impact, especially from an offensive standpoint, from regular season to postseason, he does that better than Giannis. But also, Giannis gives you defensive impact at his best that Jokic couldn't even dream of. So that's always the give and take with me when it comes to Jokic and Giannis. But I do believe they're going to be always close together with one another in the rankings. Both of them, once they start getting into a decade-long stretch of just dominance, which Giannis is closer to Jokic. I think a lot of people tend to forget that. Jokic hasn't been playing to this degree up until really 2020 almost, but or 2021, one of the two. But as soon as both of them clear the 10-year threshold, we're going to get into very serious conversations that they should be over a couple of other people. But I think that both of them alongside one another makes a lot of sense. And then finally in this group, the last name I have in this group of subsection of players, Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett, 15-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA, 12-time All-League defender. 4 rebounding titles, 2008 champion, I believe was the best player on that title team, 1 league MVP in 2004, 1 DPOY in 2008 as well. But very similar to the last 2 names, consistently top 5 in the MVP race. But who KG was in the MVP race probably isn't a great indicator on how great of a player he was, just because there was a lot of years where he's just not on the team that's sufficient enough to constantly put him in that conversation. But at his best, KG is giving you around 22, 25 points, out there giving you 12 to 13 rebounds, 5 to 6 assists sometimes, and then obviously a really well-rounded scorer. How efficient and effective as a scorer he was at his absolute best. People tend to embellish a lot of the theory of who Kevin Garnett was or was supposed to be in contrast to who he actually was in the NBA on a game-to-game basis are 2 different things. We do this thing now where people are revising history and acting as if like versatility at that point in time in NBA history was at a premium. In theory, it should have been, and it would have been, and it definitely would have been great to have. But rim protection was by far the most valuable aspect. That's the reason why Tim Duncan was still the better defender than Garnett at that point in time in NBA history. And then the other thing that I think a lot of people tend to not give credit enough to Garnett, or at least tend to ignore, was his inability to create on his own to the degree of a lot of other players were able to, especially from a scoring perspective. But I do give KG a lot of break and a lot of grace because he was not on teams that were good enough to really help him out. The impact, transcendent defender, one of the top, I believe, especially in a modern NBA, top 5 defender of all time. If we now move to the next section of players, we have Oscar Robertson up next. Oscar Robertson, 12-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA, 6-time assist champ, 1 MVP in 64, but was up there with the best of them in terms of constantly being in the MVP race, 5th, 3rd, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, pretty consistently. As we all know, famously, was the first Mr. Triple-Double for the first, I want to say, 7-8 years of his career. He actually averaged a triple-double. There's just, unfortunately, not that many games I could really pivot to actually watch Oscar Robertson playing in Cincinnati, a team that really wasn't winning that many games, because that is probably one of the biggest knocks is that these numbers didn't really translate to that much success. And when they did, obviously, you're getting knocked out in the first round. This series right here was one of the bigger indicators. Against Bill Russell, dropped all the way down to 39%. No shame on that. No shame on that. No shame on that. But the guard that I have ahead of him didn't do that. There's a guard I'm about to put ahead of him that wasn't doing that. Next up, we have KD. I have Kevin Durant ranked at 14. 15-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA, 4-time scoring champion, 2 championships, 2 finals MVPs, 1 regular season MVP. The beginning of the 2010s was his and LeBron's back and forth. KD in his 3rd year not only led the league in scoring, but was 2nd in MVP race. That is grossly overlooked in Kevin Durant's career. How quick KD came into the NBA and was an immediate impact player at the highest degree. Very impressive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. 9 out of the first 10 years. KD was unequivocally a top 5 player in the NBA. An elite level scorer. Some would argue the greatest scorer of all time. Grossly underrated defender, especially at his absolute best. Excellent rim protector and roamer. Amazing athlete early on in his career as well. That's how we translated to a year in which he got to the free throw line 10 times, not once, but twice. Kevin Durant, someone who is synonymous with jump shot shooting, led the league in free throw attempts not once, but twice. How much was that impact able to translate over to the postseason? Saw a little bit more defensive schemes, a little bit more physical. Didn't really carry over as much. And then obviously the passing. The playmaking was there, but being able to capitalize off that playmaking with your passing, I don't think that Kevin Durant was able to do that with the best of them. A lot of players I have ahead of him, but it's really hard to knock KD. And then the last player I have in this section Jerry West. The logo, dog. Jerry West. 14-time All-Star. 12-time All-NBA. 5-time All-Defense. Won a championship in 1972. Finals MVP as well in 1969, though on a losing effort, but still finals MVP. And overall, like I said earlier with Oscar Robertson and even Elgin Baylor to an extent, back then, if you had a jump shot offensively, you were significantly greater than a lot of other players at that point in time because, of course, players like Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Nate Thurman, they were dictating a lot. Bob Pettit, they were dictating a lot of things that were happening on the defensive side of the floor. If you were able to supersede that with your jump shot, you would be fine. And Jerry West was the best jump shot shooter back in the day. Had a ratchet on him. And as a guard, having high 40s, 1 year 50% clip, and just overall being able to sustain this degree of excellence from regular season to post. And again, be very mindful that a lot of these series, they're either against Bob Pettit or Bill Russell, and he's still able to hold it. And I will say this, some of the games that I have seen of the old Lakers games, when Jerry West was off of the floor, the offense went to shit. It was not the same offense. Jerry West, the reason why I have him over really both KD and Oscar, sustained his impacts a little bit better than them in the postseason. At a point in time when guards really weren't shooting that well from behind, really from the field, had a jump shot. And at that point in time in NBA history, having a jump shot or having a team that had the ability to shoot the ball, back then that was extremely valuable. For the most part, you're matching up against either Bob Pettit or Bill Russell. So that's very impressive in my eyes. So that's basically what you are. Coming in at number 12, Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah, you're out of your fucking mind. I'm going. You got Wilt better than Kevin Wade? Are you serious?
So Wilt Chamberlain, I have him ranked number 12 all time, 13-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA performer. Didn't make only 2 all-defensive teams, but definitively, in my opinion, one of the top 5 defenders in NBA history. Led the league in rebounding 11 times, led the league in scoring 7 times. Technically was an assist champ as well in 1968. And then finals MVP in 72. The biggest knock against Wilt would be his postseason performances, in particular against Bill Russell or in situations in which a lot of the offense has to be funneled more inside. And also early on in his career, a lot of these numbers are massive. They're significant. They're amazing. They're stupendous. But how much impact did those numbers have? How much did those numbers translate? Not only are these things that are self-admitted, you can also watch the games as well. And several teammates back then and other players who played would overly state numerous times that a lot of the numbers that Wilt was posting were not as impactful as it was perceived due to the level of ball dominance that would need to be done to put those numbers up. And I'm all for, if you have the ability to make adjustments to your game to help your team out in winning, because that is the ultimate goal, let me figure out if you have the ability to do so. To be fair, Wilt did. He was able to do that. He did that when he was with the Philadelphia 76ers on a really good team with Hal Greer, Chet. What's Chet last name? Is it Chet Walker? I think it's Chet Walker. Chet Walker, yeah. Chet Walker, Billy Cunningham, Hal Greer. So he got on a really good team, won a championship in 67. Now, to be fair, Bill Russell was not 100% in this series, but still, really, really great postseason run for him. Kind of proved a lot of people wrong. And he had the ability to be very, very flexible. Rung off 3 MVPs in a row, MVP in his rookie season as well, and genuinely believe that he was the second best player at worst throughout this stretch of years. Moving on to the next name up, the name that apparently is a bit controversial regardless of how some people may feel about him being in and out of the top 10 or ahead of someone else. I do have Larry Bird. Larry Bird is the first name out of the top 10 for me. I think that many of y'all kind of already know how I feel about Bird. A lot of it just has to do with not sustaining it over a long period of time, and also early on in his career, not being able to translate a lot of that impact over into the postseason and the production as well. But outside of that, 12-time All-Star, 10-time All-NBA, made All-Defensive Team 3 times. Some of those defensive selections, but I still think he was a positive defender, more or less. 3-time MVP, all in a row, was MVP candidate effectively for like 8 straight years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, for 8 straight years was finishing top 3 in the MVP race. Very impressive. And I do believe, synonymously believed to be the best player in the 80s. Really, really great offensive weapon. Solid scorer that became even better as a creator as his career progressed. Very underrated passer. I think even the numbers don't necessarily do justice to how good of a passer Bird really was, especially in tight quarters back in the 80s. Very underrated rebounder as well. I think the numbers also don't do any justice to how good of a rebounder Bird was. And just all around a really solid game. I guess the question that many people want to know is, why is it that Bird is ahead of Kevin Durant, just in case people are asking? I believe that there's a lot more things that could translate from Bird to KD in postseason play at their absolute best without being on these super squads. I think as a passer and playmaker, if Durant was able to pass and play make slightly better and translate that, because I do believe that would have helped him out in a lot of postseason play. But if he was able to pass and play make to the degree of Bird, or even slightly less, then I do believe we will be having a different convo. But to also be fair to Bird and Kevin Durant back and forth, again, there are years where Bird's impact in the postseason is very wary. It goes up and down. He's not scoring at the same degree because he cannot create to the same degree as a Kevin Durant from a scoring standpoint. And so that is that's all understandable as well. But I think the passing and playmaking for me is what puts Bird over the top of Kevin Durant, and that is an aspect of his career or of his game that he sustained for practically the entire time he was in the NBA. The entire time. So that's probably the biggest difference.